We are here with Meadowlark's Braintrust. We got Howard Bryant, Tom Haberstroh. I'm Kate Fagan. Tom, as our resident NBA expert and been following the evolution of this league, what do you think about where the NBA is right now in terms of that change from player empowerment and the individual versus the community and the teams?
Yeah, so when I talk to trainers, players, executives, they all are very excited about getting to 90%. They're excited about that number. And only when they are compared to the W or the NFL or Major League Baseball, then they start to sweat and say, well, what are we doing that they're doing? We're doing not as well as they're doing. And the NBA says the number is roughly 90%. I think that the pure issue here, the reason why the NBA is lacking or trailing the other leagues here is I think a lot of it comes down to money. I think it is not a coincidence that the three NBA players that have been most vocal to this point on media day are Bradley Beal, Kyrie Irving, and Andrew Wiggins. All three of them make more than $30 million this season. They've made over $100 million already in their NBA careers. And so I think more so than the W, the NBA, it's kind of an option to get a vaccine because they say, hey, I can afford not to have, a couple game checks here and there. For them, it's not a job requirement. For them, hey, if I don't get the vaccine, I might get some grief and talk from Stephen Curry or teammates, et cetera. But for them, I think the NBA, there's so much money that they have a lot more security about something like a vaccine to make you play basketball. And in the W, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not really sure the NBA is behind at all, to be honest. I think that what's happening is that what you're seeing with the NBA is you're seeing a lot more prominence. The guys who are doing the talking are some of the biggest guys in the league. And I think that's the reason why optically, anecdotally, it looks like they're so far behind. I mean, I think that if you're at 90% as a business, you're probably in line with everything else that's taken place in the country. If you're at 90% amongst your friends, that's probably a pretty good number, depending on your friendship group, right? I think that the difference is Kyrie Irving is doing the talking. And we haven't heard from the biggest name in sports, LeBron James, that he's playing cat and mouse in terms of his vaccination status. He hasn't said he's vaccinated. So we assume that he isn't, but he also hasn't said that he isn't, right? So there's that. So it's where the messaging is coming from. I think that if we're going to pay really close attention to the NBA, then it's probably not that different because you do have Damian Lillard, who's also very prominent. He makes a ton of money, and he was out there completely pro-vax in terms of making sure. And you've had Steph Curry, and you've got some of the coaches, Steve Kerr, some of the other guys who are actually being very vocal about this. So to me, the real question is who's getting our time, and why are they getting our time, and is their time representative of what's actually taken place as a whole?
Wait, right. But I'm not sure that I fully agree with this idea that it's just who's doing the talking. The idea that the NBA, which is the most progressive league, right? I mentioned this in the essay. It's a thing that it gets credit for. And if we're all going to agree with the assumption that in the societal political debates, being vaccinated is seen as quote unquote progressive, it is worth noting, and an odd statistic, that the NFL, which has even more players, and the NHL, and pretty much every league you can point to, has more vaccinated players than the NBA. And as of opening of business, like we're about to hit opening of business, but it's not as if the vaccine has just come out a couple of weeks ago.
But aren't those numbers, how accurate are those numbers, right? I mean, that's the first thing. It's like, okay, the NHL hasn't even really put out their numbers. They say they are estimating that. We don't even know what those numbers are, right? Yeah. I'm saying that if you've got one league that's 90, if the NBA is to be taken at, it's not like they're at 60%. They're at 90%, so they say. And some of them say they're even higher than that, right? So to me, the issue is like why we're separating the NBA from this is the who's doing the talking, right? I mean, are those raw numbers really that different from the National Football League? Are they? I don't think that the NFL is The NFL is not at 99%. The real comparison, if you're thinking about it in terms of raw numbers, if you want to make the argument that the NBA is the recalcitrant league, I don't know if you can make that argument numerically, statistically. Can you make it anecdotally? Absolutely, because they're doing a lot of the talking. You're expecting, like to your point, Kate, in the essay as well, right? Why does the NBA get this reputation as the progressive league? A lot of times it's because of who's doing the talking, because you had LeBron out there doing his more than an athlete stuff. He's doing the more than a vote stuff. They're out there, you had Giannis out there doing his thing in terms of the, voting registration, and LeBron with his school. So the types of the vocalness that you're getting on those other issues, you're getting silence on this issue, right? To me, that's very much different than the actual raw statistical numbers, because I'm not sure I know what I don't think there's that much of a difference in terms of what we're being, like Giannis is out there, they're vaxxed. I mean, you have a whole bunch of teams. Like I was talking to my boy Bomani Jones about this morning, and we were thinking, okay, like I'm trying to make sense of the numbers. I'm trying to say, okay, when we did our HBO show last week, and we had Michelle Roberts on and DeMaurice Smith on, and I think it was DeMaurice Smith who said that the league average in the NFL is 80%, but then he says that the players are 93% vaxxed. So those numbers don't really make sense to me. What I do see, however, is I see a lot of people who have been given credit over the last 5 years for being leaders out front, falling really short and coming up really small on this issue.
Well, let's talk about then the idea of the NBA being progressive. All right. So, and society as a whole, we've got this thing going on, at least that it's seemed this way for the last few years, where if I tell you one of my beliefs, you're going to assume all of my other beliefs. Right? Like if I tell you I'm for gay rights, you probably assume that I am pro-choice and, go down the line. I believe in climate change, all of these different things. Like there is a monolith of the way people are believing things. What is it in the NBA that if we're saying that even the people that are speaking loudest, even if we're putting aside this idea, is the 90% number something to be concerned about? What does it say about the NBA? What does it say about the fact that Kyrie, perhaps LeBron, guys that in certain issues you think you understand where they land, on this particular issue, it's completely opposite what you would assume.
Yeah.
Like that takes us to an odd place about where we think we understand how everyone thinks, and then also how we believe we understand how athletes in the NBA think.
Yeah, I want to clarify here is that like we don't know LeBron James's status, right, one way or the other. But to Howard's point, like I think that's the story, right? The fact that LeBron James, we don't know what his status is, I think speaks to the fact that they're being very cagey. Chris Paul, the head of the players union, there hasn't been this like public campaign for getting a vaccine. However, on the women's side, I feel like the W has been out front and trying to get the word out about the vaccine. They have 99%. And Kate, in your essay, you state that that might be 100% by now. But I do think that I'm going to come back to money here because the NFL doesn't have as many guaranteed money in their contracts as much as the NBA. So I think in the NBA, it's a matter of like, if I got my money, I'm good. Like, unless they're I think when Andrew Wiggins is saying my back is against the wall, I guess, we'll see what happens. Kyrie Irving saying maybe we can work something out. I think this is going to be a financial issue where the highest paid player in the WNBA is $220,000. The number one pick, Charlie Collier, she's getting $70,000 in guaranteed money. Cade Cunningham, the number one pick in the NBA, is making $8.7 million. This is, to me, an issue of, hey, look, I don't know if I have job security. If I don't get this vaccine, I don't know if I'm going to have a job. Whereas I think in the NBA, they've got yacht money. They're not worried about if they're paying the mortgage. They're worried about how many mortgages they have to take care of. Like, I think this is a class issue, is that the WNBA and the NBA are the same sport in the same league with a lot of the same owners and the same demographics. But really one of the issues is money, is that this is You know, the NBA players were paid $4 billion last year, and the total amount paid to the W players was $14.5 million. Andrew Wiggins makes double the entire W in total salary. So
that's,
it's definitely money is definitely part of it, of course, but then part of why the NBA has the money is they've gone through the part where they had to unionize, and I know they're still unionized, and where community and league trumped the individual needs. And I think you see every sport go through this. The NFL is still union. I mean, I know all sports are union, but I'm saying the NBA has reached this territory where it's as if the community of the NBA and the game of the NBA and the game of basketball, it is almost like atomized. Well, I think that community is not still the same as it once was. That's how it feels from the outside. Howard, please.
Well, I think that you've got a couple things to consider. I mean, number one, to your original point, I think that you are seeing the WNBA's politics aligning across the line. All of these different, that continuum does exist on this topic as well, whereas it may not exist with the other guys, right? With the other players. But here you've got consistency of politics in the WNBA. You can assume A, then you can assume B, C, D, and E. You're not getting that on this issue in the NBA, but in some ways maybe you are, because you're still, like I said, the numbers aren't, it's like, who are we emphasizing as well? You're still looking at a pretty high percentage. But I do think that there is something to what Tom says. There's a lot to what Tom says is that when we're talking about vaccines and when we're talking about community, we talked about this yesterday when we were considering this topic. I always say Margaret Thatcher was right? There is no community. That when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar came out and talked about, this is a public health issue, I'm saying there is no public, right? For the last half century, all we've been doing is selling privatization to our citizens. We've been privatizing everything. We've been saying that, that there's no reason for unions, right? That unions exist to protect the weak and not the community. Everything we do in this culture is anti-community. We don't build communities. We don't try to build communities. Everybody who is trying to build communities in so many ways is almost considered an outlier. So that's one of the reasons why was everybody so surprised and shocked and amazed when the Minnesota Lynx came together when Kaepernick took his knee and when they got involved and Maya Moore did her thing, because it was community. Everybody was surprised. Oh my God, they're all holding hands. They're all coming together. We were shocked. And so the idea that we are suddenly going to turn on a community switch is in some ways completely unrealistic. And I think the other piece to this is that we're looking at these athletes as activists, but what we're really seeing is empire, right? When you're talking about these guys being individualized and you're talking about the NBA looking atomized and all that, it's because each one of these guys is moving toward a place where they don't even believe they need the league. This is not 1979 where they all had to come together and make concessions and keep the league from being on tape delay, or the 1960s where they played double headers in cities that weren't even their home cities to keep the league alive. They don't believe they need any of this anymore. They are beyond. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but in a lot of ways, the way some of these players are behaving across all sports, it feels like they are beyond community, but it's not that different from what we sell as a culture.
That's fair. Well, then isn't it worth asking whether the NBA moving toward and being in the middle of this shift toward this model where it's empire, individual empire, where the team is just simply the jersey you're wearing. And I know you can say it always has been. I'm going to look at nostalgic through rose-colored glasses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then team has had value. The jersey that you're wearing has had value. And it appears we're moving toward a place where the name on the front of the jersey has less and less value. Isn't it worth talking about right now, whether that's an NBA that's better or worse?
It's 100% a huge issue to talk about. And Tom, I'll let you take this, but it is one of the questions. When you talk about athlete empowerment and player empowerment and all of these different things, you still also have to have balance. And what happens to a league where the Chicago Bulls don't matter, or the Boston Celtics don't matter, or even the Los Angeles Lakers don't matter. What happens to the future of that league? I think you're heading in that direction in a lot of ways. And I think that it's something that you don't see in football because you've got more balance, although balance also comes at a cost, which is less control. So I think it's 100% right. I think vaccination-wise, when we're talking about this, I think that the pandemic really has been this perfect storm of an idea that is exposing a lot of fractures that have been building for a long time.
Yeah, and I do think that player empowerment is such a big piece of this puzzle, because I think while we've moved away from the team and away from the constituents, we are also just putting the spotlight on you as a person. Player empowerment is an individualism concept. It's saying, hey, it's a private issue, like what you want in your life, and go get yours, bet on yourself. All of these mantras are putting the spotlight on the back of the jersey, not the front of the jersey. And we have been trending in this direction for a very long time. And I think it is interesting how when you see player news of a player's traded on Twitter, the agents are being included in that, in that news break. I think it is becoming more and more, it is not as important, the agency or the representation that you are coming from, as it is the team you are joining. But I have to point out that this has been trending. And when Kendrick Nunn today, it was reported by Dave McMenamin at ESPN that Kendrick Nunn is now joining Clutch, newest Laker, Los Angeles Lakers joining Clutch, and Rich Paul, and which is also LeBron James. That's big news in the NBA now. And did anyone really know that Kendrick Nunn was on the Lakers? Like, was that a big news story? Like, this is when you look at the NBA and how much money is involved, Bradley Beal, does he care all that much about what his teammates think about what he said yesterday?
Or who his teammates are?
He might be gone
step
in
further.
like 2 weeks, right? Like traded so often, and this is part of the Ben Simmons conversation too, is who am I loyal to? Joel Embiid is trying to go out to LA to like make things right with Ben Simmons. And he's like, no, I'm good. Like the sense of team is eroding with all of that. And I think the peer pressure of COVID and like Kevin Durant, I just saw a report from Vinny Goodwill at Yahoo Sports that said Kyrie Irving is expected to get the vaccine by the end of training camp and be ready for the regular season to join his team, not because Sean Marks or the coach or the owner said so, because Kevin Durant said so, his buddy, right? So I think when we talk about the NBA and vaccines, the money component, player empowerment, all of it is in there, because I just got off the phone with an executive who pointed out that for the WNBA, for WNBA players, a lot of them have to get vaccines in order to play overseas. Is that true, Kate? Like, is your understanding that in order for them to play in Europe in their offseason in the WNBA, that they have no choice but to get a vaccine to play?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
You get into those countries, you have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, Kate, can I jump in one quick thing to what you said earlier that I want to just, you were talking about the trend of politics, right? The trend of being able to assume somebody's politics. I think we also need to be precise in our terminology as well about activism, right? I mean, Rush Limbaugh was an activist. He was advocating for a given position, right? Being an activist does not always mean being on our idea of what good is. Tucker Carlson is an activist, right? You can be very active for a given position. And I think that what we're seeing here is a conflation of terms. Some people are very much advocates for things that we don't agree with. That doesn't mean they're not activists.
Cole Beasley's an activist, right?
Exactly. Cole Beasley is he's out actively buying tickets for unvaccinated fans to go to other stadiums, right? That's an active thing to do. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that one of the components of player empowerment is also for them to be empowered to do all kinds of things that completely piss us off and that we disagree with, that there's another side to this as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always feel like people assume that if you're actively defending the status quo, that you're not an activist, right? Like defending the status quo is also a form of like activism, identity politics, however you want to say it. But I'm wondering this vax number, Howard, it seems like you're a little less like it's a canary in the coal mine. I'm maybe a little more on the idea of like, this is confusing to me. And let's look at the culture around it. And one of the things that kept coming up for me was wondering why it seems in our society when you reach an elite level, if we want to say monetarily, status, like here I'm thinking of Elon Musk at times presenting himself in the vein of an anti-vaxxer in the same way that someone in the NBA with that same kind of cultural cachet does. It reminds me, and my friends and I joke about this a lot, of how I could go to a bar in rural Arkansas or on the coolest corner in Bushwick, and I might not really be able to tell the difference between those two things. There is, that circle is kind of meeting between what some people consider far left and some people consider far right. And then it leads to this place where I then think, well, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe class doesn't exist anymore. Maybe class has been just like
class is very much alive.
But then you realize that the class is popping up in mysterious ways. Like in my bar analogy, you determine class by the fact that what is being served on the menu. Is the ice cube a single cube? Like ridiculous things like that. You can
and if it's a really big cube, like I bought some of those from Crate and Barrel, by the way, they are great. They're so much fun and they make you feel special, man. It's a big round ice cube for my drink. I have
one more point here. Besides the big cube, which you wouldn't find in rural Arkansas, and it's like this discernment of class. Yeah. That people want to say class doesn't exist, but actually it's sneaking itself in, and you have to like really understand how class is operating. The second piece of this, like, this class being flattened, and this has always been the case, is how do you get out of the rules? If you have a certain level of cachet in our society, part of what you're trying to do, Elon Musk, Kyrie Irving, I'm sure he has other reasons, or NBA players, is like, am I above the rules now? And I think in certain other sports leagues, there's still that I'm not above whatever the rules are. And the NBA is sort of like dancing on that line of the rules don't apply to me.
Well, yeah, Kyrie Irving is suggesting that he's going to get around it. Like Howard, I don't know what Kyrie is hinting at there. Wiggins is like, hey, we're talking, and when the time comes, we'll come to an agreement on something. Like, I don't know what that is. But I feel like the NBA is treating the cities, New York and San Francisco, as the bad guy, right? It's like, hey.
Or privately the good guy.
Right.
We'll let you handle this.
Go ask your father. Yes.
Exactly. I have nothing to do with it. It's their rule, right? To Kate's point, it's money. Tom started this conversation with money. Kate, you're bringing us back to money with Elon Musk. I said, yes, if you have the opportunity, it goes back to what the old great New Republic reporter Michael Kinsley used to say about money. Money gives you fuck you ability. It gives you the ability to skirt the rules, to not be part of any of this because you aren't relying on it, right? So you're not relying on those rules. You're not relying on Social Security. So what do you care about the politics? Because when you turn 65, you already got money. It's not going to be your fight. And so the celebrity culture that we've created allows them the flexibility to be so famous that you have every genius, expert, and charlatan out there telling you that this is the special formula to boost your immune system, that you can afford. You can afford all of these different concoctions that allow you to get around the virus or around the vaccine, where most of us just have to go get jabbed, right? We don't have the money or the time or the resources to go through all these experimental treatments. I can't go get gel shots in my leg, right? To replace the lack of cartilage in my left knee, where Kobe Bryant could fly to Germany and go get special shots and go, it's different for them. I mean, one of us is talking about buying a new refrigerator. The other one of us is flying to Mars, right? They are different. It's totally different. And I think that because we sell the celebrity culture so much, right? We listen to them because they're the ones who made it. They're the famous ones. And we give them far too much dispensation. Because of that, we allow their sort of orthodoxy to blend into ours when they are not the same. right? I mean, how many of these athletes are we talking to who, to your point, I made some sort of comment the other day where it was like, well, who knew that anti-science was going to be where the kneelers and the MAGAs met? Who knew this was going to be the spot where they were going to, this was going to be the confluence point?
That's the whole Black Jeopardy segment. The whole conceit in Black Jeopardy is having this, the Tom Hanks one is just fantastic. Like, is that the spectrum, it's wrapping around on the other side for a lot of people in this country, where they're now like, hey, strange bedfellows here. Yeah. I want to get back
serious about it, though, just really quickly, but to be, to bring it back to something a little more serious, that confluence point is a very serious one, which is distrust of your government, right? So where the MAGAs can sit and talk about George Soros and the deep state, Black people can sit and talk about Tuskegee, right? So there is some history here where there is a confluence point. And where you run into those issues is very simply, we're in an age of distrust and misinformation and misdirection and all of this, and propaganda and all of these different things. And everyone is susceptible to that. Where are you getting your information? Distrust of our industry, of media, the siloing taking place where there is no commonality. It's not like we're all getting our news from the same places anymore, right? So because of all of these different things, you may find yourself in bed with a stranger when it comes to a lot of this information. And once again, the vaccine, this entire pandemic is the perfect issue where those where those folks on opposite sides would actually find themselves aligning.
Hey, Kate, I don't know if you saw this, but Natasha Cloud tweeted at Bradley Beal last night. Did you see this?
No, I didn't see it.
Yeah. So in the Washington Post, there was a story about Bradley Beal, saying, it's funny that, you can get the vaccine and still get COVID. People don't talk about that. I'm paraphrasing. Sorry, Bradley Beal, if I'm misquoting you on that. But in the Washington Post story that was tweeted out by a Washington Post writer, Natasha Cloud responded and added Bradley Beal. And Natasha Cloud, for those who don't know, Washington Mystics player, great defender, champion. She wrote back to Bradley Beal and said, the info has been presented to us numerous times. And us is interesting there, is whether she's talking about NBA players and W players. I'm not sure, but she says, the info has been presented to us numerous times, and they never said it would keep us from getting COVID, but it drastically decreases the chances of death and slowing the curve. You still my guy, though, handshake emoji, but let's save some lives. I think we should have a conversation about, is there anything in particular that the WNBA did that got 99%? Like, was there any sort of leadership within the WNBA that the NBA lacks? Because we do know Kyrie Irving, not only is he apparently anti-vax and has not gotten a vaccine yet, he's also part of the executive board. And so when you're looking at the executive board, did the NBA executive board make this push initially? I don't think so compared to the W. So what is it? Natasha Cloud just being the one who's like, hey, Brad, come on. Like, we've been hearing the same Zoom presentations. What is it about the WNBA that she's tapping into that maybe Brad Beal hasn't heard?
Well, I think the strategy the W took from the beginning was that information about the vaccine and the virus was going to be presented by player representatives. It was not going to be league mandated right from the beginning. It was not going to be the GM or the coach. It was very clearly, let us get the player reps together and let's make sure this is a peer-to-peer information sharing operation because of the trust that exists, that I think has existed for a long time in the W, but that was really solidified in the bubble and the way they operated across numerous ideas, whether say her name or whether the Raphael Warnock campaign. There was a lot of cohesion. There was a lot of communication, and the pathways to communication are very open and player to player. And that's how they communicated about the vaccine, the virus, any questions, any skepticism, they were talked about peer to peer. I'm not assuming necessarily that the NBA didn't have that, but given Kyrie's place in the player rep. I'm not sure that that's necessarily how communication played out. The second thing I would point out about the W that I think is relevant and is relatable is that you can't play in the W and have your ego run unchecked. It's just impossible. I'm not saying people don't have egos in the W. They certainly do. They got the swagger, but if you're getting on a commercial flight in the back middle seat twice a week, your ego and your finances and your cultural cachet, you're always getting checked. Whether you're popping on Twitter, whether you're flying commercial, all of those things, like you can't run amok on what you think your invincibility level is. And I think those are two key distinctions when it comes to why the NBA, and I'm not saying their vax numbers are like crazy, but why it's not an insignificant situation that's happening in the NBA.
No, and I think, Kate, you're 100% right. And once again, this does come back to money. This is why the class piece of this can never be underestimated. The players, the NBA players are super rich. They're not just, I mean, they're really, really rich, right? I mean, when you start looking at, I mean, why is Ben Simmons not in camp right now? Because he can sit and still make, what is it, 16 million? Half of that 32 million that he's owed before October? It's $16 million sitting on the couch, right? I mean, which is also more than the entire W, right? So there's that. And I think there's also the fact that the NBA players are beyond, I don't want to say they're beyond, I said they're beyond community. They're beyond each other. They don't rely on each other to survive. They don't need each other to survive. They haven't needed each other to survive for 45 years. It's been a really long time since, you got to go back to the NBA finals in 1984 when the league could finally begin to say, you know what, maybe Madison Avenue likes us. And you probably, and that's being conservative, you probably have to go to the early 90s to Jordan, right? And for them to feel really, really, really confident, you probably have to go post-Dream Team. So we're still looking at 30 years of a league where the athletes, and it's the nature of basketball as well. I always say that basketball is simultaneously the most beautiful and most selfish game out there. It's a best player wins league it's a best player wins sport by definition, right? Because there's only 5 of you out there. There's only 10 guys on the court. So I do think that there's something about the sport that lends itself to that sort of individualism. Just like baseball. Baseball is an extremely individual sport. Why? Because when I'm hitting, it's me versus you. If you're the best player, there's no help defense in baseball, right? At the bottom of the ninth, the ball comes to the center fielder. If the best player is a first baseman, he's got to watch just like everybody else to see you make the play or not, which is why.
Yeah, how is it possible that the Angels could be so bad over these years and have every MVP?
Have two of the best players in the league, which is one of the reasons why I really like Kate's point in her essay about late game situations, about last second plays. You have to work together in those in the WNBA right now. Maybe there's going to become a point in evolution. And by the way, go back and look at clips of Bob Cousy and the Boston Celtics in the 1960s. The game looked a lot like the WNBA in terms of moving and screening and passing. The game wasn't aerial yet. Maybe we're going to, 25 years from now, we're going to be looking at this and having the same conversation about the WNBA that, boy, you can get your own shot and not have to pass the ball anymore. Maybe it's going to become that. But as of today, they are in a point in time where both athletically as teammates and financially as business people, as employees in an industry, they do need each other.
Yeah.
There are people out there who never went to college who make more money than some of the best players in the NBA, in the WNBA. So that checking is going to affect how you move forward.
I think when you look at the NBA, the staff side, the executives, the trainers, the just anyone who keeps the lights on for NBA games, their vaccination rate is as close to 100% as it gets, right? Mirroring the WNBA. And for them, it's, I'm not going to have a job. I need to pay the mortgage. I need to take care of my family. I need to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And I don't have the choice that Andrew Wiggins does, who's already made $100 million. And you could see Stephen Curry in his press conference yesterday on Media Day is as angry and as fed up as I've ever seen Stephen Curry about Andrew Wiggins. He's like, yeah, not ideal. And Stephen Curry never does this. He never has any sort of negative comment about any of his teammates. And I think that for Stephen Curry, it's like, you better not mess this up for us, right? Like Andrew Wiggins, don't mess this up for us. And not only that, Andrew Wiggins, if he's part of a trade package to get the superstar, to get a Ben Simmons or whoever it is, he's not raising his value around the league now.
Exactly.
If he's out here, he's not helping matters. So for Stephen Curry, he does need Andrew Wiggins to step in line for his championship aspirations and Draymond Green. But for a lot of these teams, I've put it to a couple of people inside the NBA, the 40 or 50 players that are not vaccinated at this point, are they the upper class of the NBA players or are they the lower class? And more of them are just laughing at me. It's the upper class.
Yeah.
Look, put it this way. Andrew Wiggins, Bradley Beal, and Kyrie Irving are 3 of the top 25 highest paid players in the NBA.
And never mind the big guy. You even mentioned LeBron.
Yeah. We don't know Ben Simmons. We don't know a lot of these players that have been sidestepping this issue, right? We can only assume one way or the other. So that's 3 out of the top 25.
And also, if you're looking at it that way, Tom, you're looking from just the names we mentioned, it might be 5 of the 40 or 50. So it's 10. So 10% of that of that unvaccinated number is, we just rolled them off the top of our heads. I think there's something else to Kate's point that I wanted to get back to as well, and that is the idea, as we keep talking about money along these lines. But I also think that when Tom was talking about Steph Curry, I think that as much as we may want to concentrate on the implications of getting vaxxed or not getting vaxxed and what that does to your trade value, we're still talking about life and death here. You're talking about 750,000 people who have died. And I think if you're Steph Curry, if you're tight with Karl Anthony Towns, this is an insult. All of these conversations, these anti-vax conversations, there's a tinge of insult to them, if not a complete insult to people who have lost. And if you go back to where we were last March of 2020, it felt like the world was ending. It really felt like everything we knew was ending in it. And I've always talked about the difference between effect and damage. We could feel the effects of COVID when things shut down in 2020. And we could feel the effects of, you got to wear a mask in the supermarket and all of that stuff. But the damage, we haven't come close to feeling all the damage. All the stores that have closed that are never coming back. All the businesses that have been around for 50 years and never coming back. All the family members who are never coming back. All of that stuff is never coming back, right? And to have somebody like Kyrie Irving or some superstar basketball player or football player or garbage men or whomever be so cavalier with what's been going on in the world for the last 2 years is an insult all by itself, no matter of what your NBA championship aspirations may be. So I can sense that frustration as well from people going, wait a minute, could we take a little step back and realize where we are, right? Like where we are as a human race right now. I guarantee you, for all of the people out there talking about vax versus no vax versus whatever, there are all kinds of people in numerous poor countries around the world who would kill for those vaccinations right now, who would love to have access to that vaccination, to those vaccination resources right now. And we are being so cute and so cavalier, like none of this matters. We're lucky right now to be even talking about basketball if you go back to where we were last year.
And Howard, one of the pieces for why we aren't feeling the layers of that damage as a whole is because of the breaks in community, as we've been talking about, the breaks in the ways we come together as a community. And I don't just mean because of the pandemic and we're not physically able to come together as a community, just the breakdown in community, which is being paralleled in the NBA in a lot of ways, like that breakdown in community.
Yeah, and the break. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kate.
One thing to tie it even to last week's op-ed conversation about mental health. With Tom, when you were saying earlier about, and this is a Howard point about empire, but when you were talking about how these players now, it's about their personal brands and their personal empires, and Kyrie and other players not doing media, but they have it on their Instagram live.
But want their privacy respected.
True, that point for sure. And then also this point, like there's a lot of benefits of community. And one of them is to shoulder the burden across many people of what a spotlight can do to you. Some people are built for the spotlight and don't mind it, but there's got to be some level of parallel between the rates of anxiety and that NBA players are talking about, mental health more and more, and this breakdown in sharing the actual load of what it means to be an NBA player. Because so many players are now, they're building their own empires, which is great fiscally, but the impact of them on human beings, that's much more drastic. I can only imagine, as someone who has a tiny baby Instagram feed, right, that causes me anxiety, let alone multiplying that by 1,000. And I think these benefits of community that are breaking down that I see breaking down in the NBA are going to have effects, ripple effects, that it's impossible necessarily now to know what they might look like in a generation.
Right. Well, I do think that when we talk about Andrew Wiggins and Bradley Beal and Kyrie Irving, they can say all they want about how anti-vax they are, but when they have to live through being by themselves and ostracized from their team groups and having to come in on off days and get vaccine or tested or having more tests than the rest of their team, I honestly think that in the next few weeks, that will do more than any sort of Zoom call they can have. Like a lifestyle change of this is a pain in the ass. Everyone's in the fast lane and I'm sitting in traffic. I think for a lot of these players that are unvaccinated at this point, when they have to go through all of the loneliness and othering of being part of that kind of, you're not vaccinated, so you're going to have to sit over there. You're going to have to take this flight. You're going to have to take this part of the bus. You're going to have to do all these things that are going to be a very, very lack of community. I don't feel part of a team right now. I do think that's going to have a pretty big impact on some of these. Maybe they'll be so stubborn and so invested in their place right now that they're not going to be convinced to go to the other side. But I do think that education and what Natasha is getting at is like, hey, you weren't paying attention to these Zoom calls? Like we've been told all of this stuff about COVID transmission rates with the vaccine. It's not 100% protective. Come on, we knew this already. I do think some of this is going to come down to just lifestyle and how much of a pain in the ass it is going to be for NFL players, for NBA players, for all of these athletes to go on without getting a vaccine. We'll see what happens.
Well, let's also not forget, and one of the reasons why we're focusing in on the NBA is not just the news of Kyrie Irving and the rest of it, but let's also not forget who was the first league to really begin the shutdown. It was the NBA. They and everybody else sort of followed, right? I know going back, I think it was the beginning, the second week of March 2020, the NBA said they weren't playing. Tom Hanks came down, and his wife announced they had COVID. And then Indian Wells, the tennis tournament, said, we're shutting it down as well. And everybody followed. Within a week, the whole thing was done in sports.
Well, Howard, to be honest, they were the only one there. They were the only ones playing, right?
That's right.
So we give credit to the NBA, but the NFL wasn't playing. Yep. The W wasn't playing.
Major League Hockey was playing. The hockey took 4 more days. I think hockey shut down on Wednesday or Thursday. And let's not forget that when you're talking about vaccination rates and we're talking about all of these different things like the human cost of, the NBA had the first signature COVID moment with Rudy Gobert, right? We saw this. We saw what was possible by being cute with this, and it wasn't cute really quickly.
Tom Haberstroh, Howard Bryant, thank you.